Friends, we enter now into the presence of all we hold sacred. We come together to celebrate the life of John Crowley, to mourn the death of John Crowley, to lay John to rest. John, loving son, loving brother, loving husband, loving father, stepfather, grandfather, uncle, parishioner, teacher, professor, a one-time Jesuit priest. John, an intellectual, an athlete, a painter, a helper, a mover, a builder, a volunteer, a leader. John, a genuine, caring, friendly, welcoming, committed, dear soul. who died on July 23rd, 2020, after a long, courageous, honest encounter with Alzheimer's. We ask not for any special blessing, for we know there are countless ways in which John's remarkable life has blessed our lives and will continue to bless our lives. We ask not for any special comfort, for we know that we have the comfort of this gathered community, not only in the time since John died, but in the months and years ahead. We ask not for an end to any sadness we may feel, for we know it is essential to grieve when a loved one has died. So this afternoon we ask only to be open in our hearts, our minds, and our spirits, open to this moment of mourning and celebration, open so that we may be filled with an abiding love, open so that we may find meaning in John's life, meaning that will ultimately strengthen us in our own humility, grace, hope, and love. Amen. Blessed be, and welcome. Welcome, friends, to the Unitarian Universalist Society East here on Elm Hill on the Vernon Line in Manchester, Connecticut. I can't say it more directly. This was John Crowley's church. Not his only church through the course of his life, but this was John Crowley's church. He loved this congregation dearly, and we loved him back. So on behalf of the members and friends of this congregation, I extend our deep sympathy to each of you who knew and loved John, each of you whom John knew and loved. We are honored to be able to host John's memorial service and the interment of his ashes. I'm confident that John would understand why we're moving forward, even though for safety reasons we can't meet indoors in his beloved sanctuary. We can't meet inside. And I say his beloved sanctuary knowing that he contributed hours and days and weeks and months of his life to sustaining this building, that room, this congregation, with his time, with his money. He was a truly generous person. What a blessing it was to be on the receiving end of that generosity. There's a number of people, last time I checked there were at least 30, there's probably more by now, joining us on Zoom. I want to give a shout out to the folks on Zoom. I'm hoping that the sound is working and the video is working. Due to the nature of this event, I want to make sure you know we're not able to unmute the folks on Zoom. Later in the service, we will be inviting people to share brief memories of John. But while we're doing that here, the folks on Zoom can certainly share in the chat, and I know most of you know how to do that. I want to begin our service by asking all of you to take a deep breath. Enter into this sacred moment on this sacred ground that was certainly sacred to John Crowley. Breathe deeply, and as you do, find that place inside of you, that place where you may go when you long for comfort and solace, that place where you may go when you yearn for peace, that place where you know your truth, where your voice is strong, that place from which you reach out to those who are hurting, that place in which you commune with that which is holy in your life. Find that place. Know you are welcome here. Let us celebrate and mourn John Crowley. In Unitarian Universalist tradition, it is our custom to begin worship with the lighting of the chalice flame. This is a symbol that was very familiar to John. It's our symbol of faith, hope, love, and community. And I want to invite his granddaughters, Caitlin and Reagan, to come forward. They're going to light the chalice this afternoon. I say, hopefully. You can hear me. For those of you who aren't accustomed to this ritual, this happens all the time. Is there a smoker in the house?
There's nothing we can do. All right.
As we light our chalice flame, we pray that the echoes of John's life will continue to sound along the edges of our lives. We pray that his spirit shall walk softly through our nights and our days. We pray that our memory of him will guide us, inspire us, comfort us, bring joy and laughter to our hearts, fill us with conviction and courage when we need it, but most of all, may our memory of him fill us again and again and again with a deep and abiding love. We have two readings we'd like to share. I'm going to read the first one. This is a version of Psalm 23, and then John's nephew Vince will read from the book of John. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever. Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a reading from the Gospel according to John, the historical John, the Apostle John, not my uncle. Although, if you think about it for a moment, the world would have been a richer place if my uncle had written a gospel. The Apostle John wrote, "If you abide in me and my words, abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you."
Thank you, Vince. So John had some musical requests for his memorial service. We heard at the beginning of the service the meditation on Titus from Jules Massenet. That's a piece that is played here on Sunday mornings from time to time. He also asked that we perform Traumerei by Robert Schumann. That's what you're going to hear next. That's Mary Bopp on piano. For the first piece, that was Mary Bopp on piano and Ann Stowe on violin. So This is Traumerei by Schumann. All right. At this time, I'd like to invite John's son, Howard, to come forward. He's going to bring the eulogy.
Good afternoon. Everybody hear me okay? John Richard Crowley was born May 19, 1933, in Saginaw, Michigan, to Floyd and Norma Crowley. He was one of 6 children. The others were Joan, who predeceased John, Pat, Serena, Judy, and Floyd. Floyd Sr. was a metallurgist and Norma was a homemaker. His birth came during the Great Depression. Like many families of that era, the Crowleys struggled financially. They were poor and they reportedly moved 6 times before he was 11 years old. All the kids helped around the house. My dad remembered having the unpleasant job of going into the basement and shoveling coal into the furnace, then using the coal shovel to kill rats. My dad had many fond memories from childhood, which had become family lore. I recall a story that my dad and his brother Floyd planned to sail down the Saginaw River like Harpoon. Except instead of a raft, they were using a wooden crate that was in no way seaworthy. They almost were to the river's edge when their father, Floyd Sr., caught up with them and prevented them from making the attempt, luckily. Otherwise, I would not be here. It's a story about my father's optimistic and imaginative nature, which was sometimes not very practical. He remembered his father, who bumped us, sending him as a child to the corner bar to buy a pitcher of beer and bring it home. And why not? It was a different time, a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and his children belonged to whom. One summer, my dad had a job selling ice cream from a cart on a bike. Another kid attempted to rob him, but my dad was determined not to let that happen and fought him off. Showed his determination and commitment. There was the time his nephew Bob got caught in an undertow in Lake Michigan, and he jumped in and rescued him, always carrying colors. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, he showed a keen intellect, and he excelled academically. He was an athlete playing football, basketball, and baseball for St. Mary's High in Saginaw. At the end of high school, when he decided to pursue the priesthood, his family were profoundly excited that one of their own might become a Jesuit priest. He enrolled in the Jesuit novitiate at Xavier University near Cincinnati. He later transferred to Loyola, where he finished his undergraduate degree and earned a master's in sociology. From there, he attended Bellarmine School of Theology, where he attained a degree of licentiate sacred theology magna cum laude, and was ordained as Jesuit priest. He went to Europe to serve as a military chaplain. While overseas, he studied German, Italian, and philosophy in Frankfurt, Munster, Rome, and Florence. In Germany, he made lifelong friends with a fellow seminarian, originally from Germany, Klaus Okenek. He befriended Klaus's brother Hubert and his wife Bärbel. He'd go back to visit many times. And Klaus, his wife Monique, and Bärbel made the trip to the U.S. to visit my dad about 12 years ago. And many of you here at USC may have met them when they visited. Back in the States, he eventually realized that while the priesthood and academics were very fulfilling for him intellectually, the priest lifestyle was not for him. He was lonely. He left the priesthood. Immediately thereafter, he worked in Pittsburgh for a while, working with troubled youth and living with his sister Judy and her husband Marv. From there, he moved to Long Island, where he taught high school. That's where he met Lily Hansen and began a whirlwind romance that started on the ski slopes, if I recall correctly. When he began teaching at community college, Lily said she wouldn't move to Connecticut unless they were married. So they were married, December 27, 1969, notably in the midst of a snowstorm. At Manchester Community College, he taught sociology, anthropology, and marriage and the family, subjects he continued to teach until he retired in 1995. In 1973 and 74, my parents welcomed more in me. Sadly, within a few years, my mother felt compelled to end the marriage. The reasons why were never entirely clear. We do know that my father was heartbroken. He didn't want the marriage to end. He loved her, and despite the divorce, they continued to work well as co-parents, and I know Nora and I always felt that way. Throughout his life, my dad was a devoted uncle to all his nieces and nephews. His niece Gina, Joan's daughter, moved to Connecticut when she was 20. As the story goes, she knocked on my father's door and asked if she could move in. The answer was yes, of course, she could live there as long as she needed. That's the kind of uncle he was. Thank you, Vince. He's a perfectionist, isn't he? At some point, my dad discovered this congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Society East, though apparently he didn't become an official member for many years, which may have had something to do with the ongoing strength of his Catholic identity. But eventually he joined and was deeply involved in the life of the congregation, as Josh noted, not only as chair of the Building and Grounds Committee, the Music Committee, the Memorial Garden Trustees, president of the congregation, but also as a pastoral caregiver, a UU mover, meaning he was one of many men who helped those move when they needed to around here. A painter, both here and at people's homes who needed painting. As a volunteer leader with charitable efforts like Christmas in April, now known as Rebuilding Together. He was a mentor to teenagers in the coming of age program known as Affirmation. And perhaps most importantly, he was a choir member. He absolutely loved choral singing, and also sang for many years with the Beethoven Chorus. Nora and I remember summer trips to Diamond Lake in Michigan with our dad, with the whole extended Crowley family. Kids running everywhere, nobody knowing where their own kids were, big family softball games, the bonfire, swimming in the lake. Everyone in 3 generations visiting everyone else's cabins. We also finally remember summer programs at the UU Camp and Conference Center at Ferry Beach in Saco, Maine. My dad spent some years on the Ferry Beach board as well as the board of the Unitarian Universalist Row Camp and Conference Center in Romass. I remember my father as a person with interesting counterparts. He was clearly very smart, intellectually gifted, yet he struggled with basic things like balancing a checkbook. He was incredibly aware of the injustice in the world, yet also optimistic and fun-loving. He could also lack patience at times, and let his temper get the better of him. Nora recalls him teaching her how to drive with a manual transmission. Remember him holding one hand on the emergency brake and the other on the handle inside the car, and perhaps not being quite so temperate in his instruction. I remember him missing a layup in the MCC student-faculty basketball game and getting so angry he slammed his hand against the wall and broke his arm. On the plus side, that's how I learned how to shift a manual transmission from the passenger seat lefty when I was 14 years old. Good comes from everything. My dad held his 60th birthday party here at USC, a dance party. A few of my friends joined us here. At one point, we were 19 years old. And my dad was the life of the party, as usual, dancing every song, celebrating. My friends and I left to go to another party, a college party, but soon after arriving, my friends asked if we could go back to the church as that party was more fun. And we did. He was also the favorite parent for my friends to join for dinner when he visited me in college. He had great stories. He was always genuinely interested in hearing from my friends about their studies, interests, and families. And he always said he used at least one word they'd never heard before. He could connect with anyone at any age. During all this time, he was engaged in the MCC community and the wider Manchester community, including working with the Manchester Housing Authority, participating in the Manchester Democratic Town Committee, acting in community theater, advising the MCC Ski Club, and a fixture with his golf crew early on the weekends at Tallwood Country Club. He was not only a pillar of this congregation, he was truly a pillar of the broader Manchester community. He met Barbara Gore in a grief group after my mom died. Apparently she was dropping hints that she was interested in him, but he didn't pick up on it for a while. Eventually they started dating and fell in love. In 2004 they were married here at UUSC, had a wonderful relationship, enjoying their twilight years, traveling, golfing, loving grandchildren. My dad received an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Before anyone who knew him recognized he was experiencing cognitive challenges. His approach to living with Alzheimer's was remarkable and truly a gift to all of us. He did not shy away from the disease. He spoke about it candidly and often. He spoke about it from his pulpit. He told us about his sadness and his courage, about his acceptance, his struggle, and his fighting spirit. It was hard for him, hard for all of us. And through it all, he was here most Sunday mornings. Someone from the congregation would pick him up, bring him to church, and Gina would pick him up and bring him to lunch afterwards. He was here smiling. Even though after a while he didn't know people's names, he was here smiling. He died July 23rd, 2020, in hospice care at Dale Buckingham in Glasgow, not far from him. His death was peaceful. Gina and Nora were allowed in full PPE as the pandemic was 6 months old at that time. He was sleeping. Nora identified herself to him and he smiled. They gave him permission to go. The next morning, a staff member called to say he died. After his passing, I reflected on the many things he taught me. Normal dad things, how to drive, play golf, ski. But also important things, like thinking about how you can serve others, how to take accountability, how to make the world and your community a better place. Lesson I learned from him was something he never talked about. I learned it from observing the way he lived his life. And that is how rewarding it is to make your own life in this world, free of others' expectations, and live it authentically, with love, compassion, and enthusiasm. He loved us, and we loved him. We will miss him. We will always remember him.
Thank you so much, Howard. So we've invited two people to share remembrances. The first is again nephew Vince Rocchio, and then Steve Cassano. So we'll invite Vince to the pulpit now.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to my cousin Howard that that was a Jesuit helicopter that flew overhead. They will have their revenge. My name is Vincent Rocchio, and it is with great humility that I stand here and offer these reflections on my uncle. Lest anyone think I'm being overly humble or hyperbolic when I say that, let me clarify. My Uncle John took the time to reflect on what he would like for a memorial service, and he left some specific instructions. One of those details he requested was to have my sister Gina speak. That's not particularly surprising. They had a deep family bond. that was rooted in taking care of each other. Uncle John took care of Gina in her early 20s. When she was wandering through life, he gave her a place to stay, find a circle of friends, a career path, and eventually her own family. Later on, Gina would help take care of Uncle John when that vicious disease took away his speech and then his faculties. There is no one among the nieces and nephews more qualified to speak about the life of John Crowley than Gina Crowley Rocchio Chase. Yet, always shunning the spotlight, she asked me to speak in her place. I'm honored to do so, and I hope to do her justice, particularly because her example to all of us should be elevated as an example of how his love influenced all of us. So the reading from the Gospel of John today was chosen because it encapsulates so much of who John Crowley was and how he lived his life. There's a very dissonant word in this reading, and that word is command. This I command you, love one another. And throughout his ministry, Jesus does not do a whole lot of commanding. When Moses delivers the law of God to the children of Israel, the language is one of command. Do this, don't do that. Compare that with the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gives. According to Jesus, people will live blessed lives if they act in certain ways. Sure, he rails against the powers that be, but to his disciples and followers, he normally uses the language of encouragement. But here, he commands. And what are we to make of this discrepancy? I think it's pretty simple, actually. What he asks us to do here is really hard. It's actually the hardest thing to do in the world, and we fail at it all the time. We have wars, we have crime, we have an enduring history of utter failure to love one another. But then we have John Crowley. All temper aside, John Crowley made that look easy. When you were in John Crowley's presence, you knew you were loved. If you were a niece or a nephew, you knew you were special. And I gotta believe that's true of being a grandchild, too. You knew you were special just by the way Uncle John spoke to you, listened to you, and adored you. John Crowley radiated the love of God to all who knew him, and he did it unfailingly and unflinchingly. He took the command of Jesus to heart, and that led him on an incredible journey. He trained, as Howard said, to become a Jesuit, a long, arduous path to ordination that he completed with distinction. Along the way, through rigorous spiritual exercises and far-flung travels, he discovered many things, the most important of which is his realization that he worshiped the God of infinite love. That understanding made him feel too constrained in his faith, and it made him realize how much he longed for a family. It's clear from the life he led that he never stopped worshiping the God of infinite love, and that the divine is made real by our love for each other. A short time after he left the priesthood, John's sister, my mother, cried when telling one of her church friends what had happened. Her friend said, "Don't worry, Joan, he'll be okay." My mother's response was, "I'm not crying for my brother. I'm crying for my church. If men like my brother leave, who will lead? My mother understood that far from abandoning his faith, her brother had instead chosen to become Catholic with a small c. I had the rare privilege of accompanying my uncle when he audited a Sunday school class here. I witnessed his delight at a teacher trying to convey to a group of children that there is a long and treasured history of believing in the God of infinite love. It's easy to see why John Crowley would believe in a God of infinite love, since he was a man of seemingly infinite talent. He was intelligent, entertaining, and infectious. He was a natural leader. Maybe not a natural driver's ed instructor, but a natural leader. And yet, for all his talent, John Crowley had a presence of humility rooted in his love for humanity. When he walked into a room 9 times out of 10, my uncle was usually the smartest person in the room. And yet, he never sought to prove that. He never made his presence felt with his intelligence, but with his compassion, his caring, his empathy. John Crowley never really elevated himself, he elevated others. He visited my cousin Mary Beth's Catholic elementary school classroom when he was still a Jesuit priest, and his obvious affection and attention to her made her the coolest kid in the class that day. He came to our church as a visiting priest and co-celebrant so that he could give my sister Lisa her first communion. And no one here will forget how he sang the Ave Maria at my sister Lisa's wedding. He drove down from Connecticut to attend my doctoral dissertation defense. He wouldn't have dreamed of missing it, knowing as he did that he was my quintessential role model for becoming a professor. And now, looking back on his career and mine, I have to say that all the professional frustrations, trials, and tribulations I experienced in higher education can be attributed to losing sight of his example. Not too long after leaving the priesthood, he drove out to visit his parents in a blue Carmen Ghia. He handed the keys to my cousin Mike and my brother AJ, telling them, "It's great, take it for a spin." Now, most of us rational adults would be thinking, "John, are you nuts? Handing over a sports car to 2 teenagers?" But no, it wasn't a lack of judgment, it was just the opposite. He knew. In giving them the keys, he was saying, "I trust your love for me enough to give you this opportunity." His love for us saved so many of us. He literally saved my brother Bob when he was swept away in the undertow of Lake Michigan. He gave my sister Gina her place in the world. He reached out to my cousin Anne and brought her and her family to visit us all here in Manchester, to bring her back into the orbit of the Crowley family. He stood at the fork in the road in my brother AJ's life and said, "This way, not that." These are just the examples I know of. I don't know the other stories, but I do know that every Crowley niece and nephew can come up here and tell you of a moment in their life when they felt his all-encompassing love. He made that impossible command seem effortless. The love my uncle imparted to all of us was not some saccharine, Hallmark card kind of love. And even though he made you feel special and unique, it wasn't even contained in that kind of American individualism. My uncle's love was such that you could feel the greater purpose attached to it. "I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will remain. As we go forward, as we seek to keep the legacy of John Crowley alive, our way is unequivocally clear. We must not only continue to love one another, we must make sure that we love in a manner that will remain. I, for one, will never be able to live up to his example. But like you, I can strive to love in a manner that will remain. That is the legacy of John Crowley.
Thank you, Vince. And now I'd like to invite Steve Cassano. I don't know how many best friends John had, but I know Steve was one of them.
It's tough to follow family. It's an honor, it's a privilege for me to be able to speak in behalf of so many of us that were so close to John, particularly through MCC. I had the great experience of being a student there, and I remember saying I want to come back there and teach. And through a whole bunch of good things that happened, I did come back. I came back in 1970, and I had some friends of mine that were my teachers that now I was teaching with. There was a new guy, John Crowley. John Crowley and I became as close a friend as I've ever had. We did so much together over the years. We were just good buds. John was a leader. He cared about community. He cared about people. He was passionate in everything that he did. John was the first person for me. When I came back, I knew some of the faculty members there, and I see a few here today that were there that my first day. My daughter was born the night before my first day. I just graduated 3 days before that and moved to Connecticut. And needless to say, I had a lot to celebrate. That next morning, we had a faculty meeting. I was not in the best of shape. And this new guy, John Crowley, said, sit down and relax. And I got comfortable because it was a whole new experience for me. That was the beginning of a relationship with John until John left us. At Tallwood, it was always Cassano and Crowley, day in and out. The four of us played for 20 plus years, from March till October. Golf was a lot to us, but having fun together, caring about each other, we were like four brothers. We went from the Hartford Road campus, which is now Fuss and O'Neill, the old brick building on Hartford Road, to the new campus. The new campus was pretty much a prefab building. It was quite an experience. But the best part of that campus was the faculty offices. We were in Faculty East. Faculty East was party building. We liked it. We were the social science building. John and I had offices close to each other, one away from each other. Tom Lewis, Mary Ann, I mean, I can go on and on. But it was a building of people who cared, who had a sense of community. It was people like that got me to even run for office. I was kind of an organizer, do this and do that. Said, you ought to run, you ought to run. And it's how I won, was those people in Faculty East along with the people in the town of Manchester. I remember sitting talking with John who was thrilled right after I was hired, because I was hired to do sociology, teach sociology. And John really had a yen to teach anthropology. And so with me coming on board, I could do those introductory courses, and John could do his anthropology. And we kidded about it, and I kept telling him I was his door opener to anthropology and so on, and somehow we got talking about Margaret Mead. So why don't we try to get her? I said, so sure in heck, it took us 2 years, but I got a phone call that Margaret Mead was coming through Connecticut, and if she could be in your building tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, she'll be glad to stop. I called John. He said, come on now, you kidding? I have never seen a guy so happy in my entire life as John was at that particular time. As we welcomed Margaret Mead, who was about this high with a cane this high. What a character, what a woman, what a moment. And I don't know if John ever felt better about anything than that. Kind of rambling, because I got a whole bunch of notes here and listening to family and so on. It's very difficult. But there were some many special moments with John. The golf course, of course, was tremendous for us. We did a lot on the golf course. I mean, we shared. I mean, John and I were like brothers. John was the best man at my wedding. When I say he's my closest friend, he clearly was my closest friend. He was a confidant. We talked about life. We talked about our relationships, our marriages, our children. I don't think there was anything that John and I didn't share. And I am so proud to have a friend like that. Last time I saw John was in Glastonbury. He was lonely. I set up a little miniature golf course in his little apartment there so he could putt. We got a couple of cups and so on. I went back a couple of days later, and John is showing me now his losing his memory and things like that. But boy, I'll tell you, he had that putter, and he knew because of the way the rug was and so on, he could make that putt bend. I mean, it was he was the happiest guy in the world. You think I gave him the world? I gave him a couple of cups to putt in and some golf balls. But that was John. Nothing flavored, nothing super, just real person. Talked about moving. He spent more time coming here and spending time here. It was remarkable what he did here. I remember moving into North Elm Street, Division Street, up into the Kennedy Road section. It's a good thing I had a pickup truck. We did a lot of those kinds of things together. But what we really enjoyed together was a sense of community. I had the privileges of serving, but I could never have served without guidance of people like John Crowley. He was just a blessing. He was stable. He thought things out. He had foresight. He cared about people. Gina. I met Gina years ago, and Gina came in and lived with John. Outstanding. What a wonderful person, and what a relationship. I admired the way they would communicate with each other and so on. And of course, there was never in my lifetime have I met more of a proud father than John Crowley with Howard and Laura. Everything that in his life meant anything came through Howard and Laura. We have lost a great man, lost a great friend, lost a great community person. Howard and Nora lost a wonderful father. I just lost my son a couple of months ago. I know what that loss is of close to family. I miss John, because John would be helping me through that. But that was John Crowley. May he bless all of us. We will miss him forever. Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much. So friends, it is the custom here in memorial services to pass a microphone and invite people to share brief memories, brief anecdotes. And I'd like to do that. We're not going to pass the microphone, What I do want to suggest is that if there's anyone here who would like to share briefly, that you come forward, maybe start a line here or here, and maybe we could hear from 3, 4, 5 people. Obviously, we're not going to hear from everybody. So if there are any brave souls who would like to share, I'd invite you to come forward and share. And when I say share, I'm talking about, 60 seconds, minute and a half, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
You US East people, you know the drill. You know if you go on and on and on, then we never get out of here. But I know some of you have some stories. And if you don't, then I'm gonna have to tell my story. Come on, Anita. And if anyone else, if you think you want to speak, come on up now.
So briefly, I joined this congregation when I was 15. That's 45 years ago almost. And John Crowley was my affirmation teacher then. And we were at the Y in Manchester well before this building was ever built. And I had the pleasure of serving with John on the board. He helped when I was fair co-chair with some people who are also here today. And everything that you said. When I would see John, he made me feel like I was the most special person in the room. When I walked in for a Sunday service, when I showed up to do some raking, "Oh, Anita, so glad to see you." And I thought, he's really glad to see me. I'm so glad I came. And my day was that much better. Back to the fair, I found a note digging through some old boxes because I'm trying to clean stuff out that John had written one year when I was fair co-chair, and I sent it to Nora. And it was John, who's got all this busy stuff to do, handwriting me this lovely note. What a nice job you did. And there was humor in it, and you're a great fair chair, and we're so happy to... He hand wrote me a thank you note? He's thanking me? Meanwhile, he's out there and it's probably raining or snowing one of these years, and he's directing traffic because he was one of our parking lot extraordinaires. So I'm really happy to be here to say how special John made me feel for about 45 years.
Come on up.
Hi everybody, my name is Josh Bellin and I'm one of Uncle John's nephews. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so that story that was told in his, when Howard spoke about him being in Pittsburgh after he had left the priesthood and was sort of trying to find himself. I was there, I don't remember it, I think I was 3. My mom tells the story that it was during my older brother Sam's 5th birthday, I think, which would have made me almost 3. And apparently Uncle John had just showed up and participated in a puppet show for my brother. That was kind of a family tradition, the puppet show. So he jumped in, and I'm sure he was wonderful. That I don't recall. But I do recall lots of other memories of my Uncle John. I remember his wedding to my Aunt Lily. I remember it was the first time I'd ever been to a wedding. After my sister and I stuck our fingers into the cake and ate lots of, I think I was 5, she was 3. I then went up to the bridal party and I asked to dance with Aunt Lily because, I don't know, she was a bride. I'd never seen a bride before, and it was just kind of amazing to me. And Uncle John sort of gave me this look like, oh, what is this kid doing? But he was okay with it, and so we danced. I went to school at Wesleyan University, so I was very close to Manchester, and I saw my Uncle John quite a bit during those days. And that may, when I think about it, have been one of the reasons I chose Wesleyan, because I wanted to be close to him. I'm also a teacher, I'm a professor, and he was certainly an example for me, and certainly somebody who I tried to model. The last thing I would say about him, and this is not so much a memory as just a feeling, I obviously had a father. My father died a few years ago, and certainly my father was incredibly influential on me, as a father should be. But I sort of thought of my Uncle John as a second father. I thought of him as somebody who, if I could name one other person one other man in particular who gave me an example of what it meant to be a man, to be a father, to be a husband, to be, to be all those things, to be a teacher, to be all those things that I aspired to be. I would say it was my Uncle John, and so I miss him very, very deeply, and I think that's all I'll say before I lose it. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Graver, long time member here at this church, and longtime friend of John's. I was on the staff at Manchester Community College in the early 70s. Howard mentioned a certain basketball game where John, he was intense. He was competitive. He didn't want to lose, and I can remember some of us, I guess I was a witness there that day. I didn't realize he broke his arm, but, well, that doesn't surprise me. John, yeah, he was one of the activities that he was involved in at Manchester Community College was the ski club, and we, for many years, we would go up to the White Mountains, stay there for a week, and John was the advisor to the club, and I would tag along. I'd sign up and go on these trips, and we would just enjoy. We would enjoy skiing. We would enjoy the camaraderie après-ski. Say no more. Speaking of that, Louise and I were fortunate enough to have a place up in the White Mountains for a number of years, and John came up many times, and we skied together, and then we would go back to the house, and we would both enjoy a Tanqueray martini. That was, and then just kick back, relax, and talk. John is the kind of person that you just felt completely comfortable and at ease with in his presence. He was a consummate host, and he was proud of his cooking. And he was very proud of his beef, I can say this correctly, bourguignon. So we've enjoyed that tasty dish and John's company. And I wore this hat today because this was another group that John, I don't know how one person can be involved in so many different groups and activities, but we have a group here of retired guys, call ourselves the UU Romeos, retired old men eating out. And John certainly enjoyed himself and the camaraderie of that group as well. So he's greatly missed. Thank you.
Actually, that's a good amount of sharing, although I don't want to, if anyone else wants to share, they're welcome to come forward. We have so many stories, and I want to encourage you to continue telling them. That's part of how we keep John's legacy alive. But I would be remiss if I didn't share two things that just have been on my mind since we started planning this memorial service, and I guess they're bookend memories of the time I knew John. When I was first called as the minister of this congregation, a group of folks from the church came over to our house in Glastonbury to paint the upstairs. I know some of you were there. I know Fred and Phil Sawyer were there. Tony Kaiser was there. He's deceased now. I assume Bill Graver was there. I don't know if the Madars were there. I can't remember. But John Crowley was there. He was the organizer. And we had painted all the rooms upstairs, and I thought we were done. And then the next day, John shows up with scaffolding. Because there's the staircase, and there's the hallway of the staircase, and he was going to get up with his scaffolding into the hallway, and I hadn't realized he was going to do that. And I started to think that this is a lot. Like, this is too much. And I was wondering, does this guy feel guilty because he knows it needs to be done and he's not sure how we're going to do it and he can do it, so he's just going to do it even though he's probably got better things to do with his time? And then it dawned on me, he just cared. And he was giving us, as a new family in the community, he was giving us that love that everyone is talking about. And I've treasured that. And that coat of paint is still on those walls. And then the last time, one of the last times John was at church, it was probably 2 years ago now. I preached a sermon about the Solidarity trade union movement in Poland. I had been to Poland in 1984, and I was telling the story about how Solidarity understood that they had been victorious over the Jaruzelski regime. And when you went into the Catholic Church in Gdansk, St. Brigida's, everyone at the end of the service held their hand up and made this, it's not a peace sign, it's a V for victory sign. And it was so vibrant in the Catholic Church in Poland at that time. Every church you went into, every service ended like that. So we got to the end of the service, and in the back of the room, I see this hand go up with this victory sign, and it was John. And his Alzheimer's was advanced at that point. But clearly he had been listening and understanding, and I loved him for that. I just loved him for that. Let's end our sharing here. Again, there are countless stories, and I urge you to share them with each other as much as you can for as long as you can. John's final musical request was Claire de Lune. You ready to go? All right. This is Mary Bopp on piano. Friends, we've come to the end of our service. So let me say to John Crowley, John, we bid you farewell. We wish for you a comforting, peaceful rest. We offer our deep and abiding gratitude for your life and your love. For those of us who remain, it is done. We have bid loving farewell to John, and now we slowly return to our living, knowing that the cycle of life is never entirely broken, and thus today we choose life, nourished and sustained by our memory of John and his loving, gentle, generous spirit. We say, go forth in peace, go forth in hope, go forth with the love of that God of everlasting love. Amen. Blessed be. We extinguish our chalice flame, mindful that the flame in our hearts, the flame at the heart of this gathered community of John's family and friends, the flame of John's spirit, that flame is never truly extinguished. It is our custom to conclude our worship service with the closing circle. I'm going to call out the words because I know a lot of you may not know them, and have you call them back to me. May faith in the Spirit of life, and hope for the community of earth, and love of the light in each other, be ours now and in all the days to come. All right, friends, thank you so much for being here. We have one more thing we're going to do. We're going to process to the memorial garden, which is down these stairs here, and inter John's ashes. That'll be a very brief ceremony. For our friends on Zoom, unfortunately, we can't make the move online to the memorial garden, and so we will bid farewell to you. Thank you for being here. It's great to have you here. We're so glad you were able to join us. For the move to the memorial garden, I will say you have to go downstairs, so if you have any mobility concerns at all, there's a balcony here to my right, your left, and you're welcome to step out onto the balcony there. Also, if anyone needs restrooms, they're in the lobby in the building right here. You're welcome to go. And we do ask, if you've got a mask, please wear a mask when you're inside the building. So we'll take a few moments and we will process to the memorial garden. The choir, the men's choir, is going to sing, so they've got to get set up there too. We'll see you there.